Greetings, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are Lost City Books, and we're very pleased to have Joanna Walsh and McKenzie Wark joining us this evening to discuss Girl Onine, a user manual. First, for those of you who are brand new, my name is Shady Rose. I'm the events manager here at Lost City Books. And Lost City Books is a used, new, and rare bookstore located in Adams Morgan, Washington, D.C. And we specialize in a carefully curated selection of lots of different kinds of books selected by our incredible staff. So if you have the opportunity to hop on into our store on 18th Street or to take a look at our website, you'll find a lot of really cool things. A little bit about our author today. Joanna Walsh is a multidisciplinary writer for print, digital, and performance. The author of 7 books, including Hotel, Vertigo, Worlds from the Word's End, and Breakup. She also works as a critic, editor, teacher, and arts activist. She is a UK Arts Foundation Fellow and the recipient of the Markovich Award in the Republic of Ireland. She founded and ran #ReadWomen 2014 to 18, described by the New York Times as a rallying cry for equal treatment for women writers, and currently runs at noentry_arts. So you can find her online in a lot of great places. McKenzie Wark is the author of A Hacker Manifesto, Gamer Theory, 50 Years of Recuperation of the Situationist International, and The Beach Beneath the Street, among other books. She teaches at the New School for Social Research and Eugene Lang College in New York City. Without anything further, I'd like to welcome both of you. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'd like to start by having you introduce yourself to our viewers in your own words. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what, in your case, Joanna, what drew you to write this book, and McKenzie, what drew you today to discuss it?
Oh, that's such a difficult first question. It's quite late at night here. It's after 11 p.m. There was just a thunderstorm. I feel like a late night DJ and not someone who's written a book at all. I quite like it. Why did I write it? That's always a difficult question for me, because the way that I write is often bringing a lot of things together, a lot of personal things, and a lot of reading around those things and thinking about people who've thought about those things before, always with a sense of urgency that this thing should be written about, or that it is a thing or could be a thing at all. So yeah, that's how I get to it. And things come together in fragments and often remain kind of fragmented at the same time. And then I just get to a stage where I think, okay, that's a thing. I hope it's a thing. At the same time, it's very, I spend a lot of time getting there. So, I'm going over it a lot. I feel like maybe that's not the right answer to the question though. I don't know.
No, that's perfect.
I've just been extremely online for 35 years. So, that's why I get asked to do these things.
Absolutely. And I think this virtual live stream is probably the perfect venue to discuss this book in a way, as we're experiencing what may be the end of the bell curve of isolation and separation and onlineness that has kind of exploded during the pandemic, but also as technology has kind of insinuated itself into all parts of personal life, right? We connect almost solely through the internet nowadays. So I wonder if you want to share a few thoughts about that, and sort of how the onlineness of the past few years especially kind of has affected your perspective and your work.
Well, I've also been a really long time online user, and for me, it was something that was waiting to happen. Certainly, I was in circumstances that would have isolated me completely as someone who might have come to writing or might not. And really, I definitely came to writing because of the internet, because there was a platform that I could actually get to, that I could put things up on, that I could find other people through. And also hyperlinked thinking is something that seemed to happen for me. I seemed to have that style of thought already. So there are certainly some things about the internet which I found incredibly not only positive, but inherent in practices that I had already.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing experiment as to what literature is after the internet. People still love books. Just because it's an old form doesn't mean we should not do it. But then what has it become when people's reading experience is substantially shaped by the internet? There's a previous era when you can think of the novel as shaped by people's experience of reading the newspaper. Like, that would have been a kind of media ecology of a certain time, or the postal system. Like those three things go together. So yeah, and one of the things that appealed to me about this book is the way it plays with form. It thinks about what form is, sort of reflective, interesting way in a kind of post-internet literature, which we're sort of now well into.
I think that's a very good point. And I find it really fascinating the way that, I wonder if you agree with this, either of you. I find it really fascinating the ways that conscious thought seems to have transformed with in this pervasive internet era, but also with it's changed the way that people kind of approach literature to read as readers, and how the attention span has changed, for example. The kind of content that people are more drawn to read and to consume has changed. And I wonder if you have noticed any of these transformations, not just recently, but maybe over the past 10, 15 years.
Well, I'm kind of very interested in also in the position of writers, economically and culturally. The way that the internet has made content available and also demanded of people who don't think of themselves as writers that they create written content, and it's kind of it's brought people in general onto, and including me, who then went on to do it professionally, but it's brought everyone onto this kind of field of writing, and also making visual images as a sort of life skill. So the other thing that onlineness has done really to the position of authors is they've become very accessible. They're usually on social media somewhere. If not, they're usually quite easy to find. You can email them, if you can DM them, you can without them knowing, and then they can just look in their DM box and see not what's there or just ignore it. Or there's this kind of strange feeling, and of course, like all writers, I get kind of quite weird DMs sometimes that assume that assume a kind of closeness which isn't really justified, and it's very interesting, this kind of concept of what a writer is and how it's changed and how it's become kind of part of what everyone is online.
Yeah, there's probably a way that and people always want to talk about everything just changed in the last 5 minutes, and it's like we have 2 centuries of media technology changing literature at the very least. So it's sort of a continuous process. But yeah, there is something distinctive about the figure of the writer in a field where many, many people write. And then how does one sort of distinguish that as a practice and treat that? How does one professionalize that and get money out of that labor? Particularly since we're living on these platforms that rely on the free contribution of content, where it's all non-labor. We're all not paid for the greater glory of Twitter and Facebook and Amazon and whoever.
Absolutely, and the something that you mentioned, Joanna, was the parasocial relationships that emerge from these platforms and from these positions, where because of how exposed you are online, and because the expectation is that you're exposed, your inner life and your every thought and your daily activities are exposed online, many consumers of online content start to feel that sort of manufactured sense of proximity to the author.
Well, we're both exposed, but also we're constantly using kind of proxies, in that obviously using language or images, these are kind of proxies for us, and they become this kind of object that sits there in the middle, an art object. And as McKenzie said, we're really creating content. We're creating content which is monetized in some way, even if we never see any monetary gain from it. So there's this kind of strange circular thing going on where we're creating something, I don't know, creative, and by virtue of it's becoming this kind of little stream of characters or photograph or whatever, then it's that the sort of monetizability of that object becomes very much a thing, and the purpose of art seems to be to create something monetizable, which is a very, very particular attitude to art, and it's I don't know what that's doing. I mean, obviously always art has been monetized in various ways. That's one of the things that it does, but there's a particular kind of thing that happens when we're all creating these objects which sit there somewhere accruing value for someone.
I mean, maybe all art is experimental forms of private property, you know. We just haven't figured out how to, they just figure out how to like enclose this.
That makes me think of the recent upsurge of NFTs and how it's kind of exposed the physical art world and sort of the shady back dealings of galleries, and the way that the value of art is honestly, again, falsely manufactured anyway. So an NFT is basically an online version of that, but it seems so ridiculous when under the light of the internet, in a way.
Well,
I only write about NFTs when I'm being paid to.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a little bit like online publishing. I write a little about blogging because I went through that in the kind of the mid 2000s. It's a little bit like online publishing, except there's money in it.
Absolutely.
Someone.
I don't know where the money comes from for NFTs, but as you said, McKenzie, we're not paid enough to talk about them today. However, I want to talk about, since we're talking a little bit about labor and monetization and content, how sort of womanhood and femininity fit into that, because the expectations so often for women and for femmes and for people assigned female at birth, what have you, tends to be that labor should be freely offered in all corners.
Yeah, the notion of that freeness works with both the kind of figures I talk about in the book, which are really the idea of a woman offline and a girl online, that, you know, people who go online who want to create a girl persona, whatever their persona offline, are entering into a kind of field of meaning, which is about potentiality, it's about value, and it does tend often to be about saleability, but it has this kind of cloak of free in all the senses of being both given and being liberated. You know, the girl is constantly used as a kind of figure of liberation, whether it's political liberation, and I have some little kind of pictures from you know, revolutionary snapshots of various eras which involve kind of girl figureheads, and or whether this is about the you know, being a commercialized figure who can be converted into some sort of value by, say, a corporation or a brand.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. The book is Girl Onine. To what extent is girl a kind of like what Anne K. Clark called a rhetoric of desire a long time ago? It's kind of rhetoric of desire. Yeah, and those are definitely some key attributes. And there's a kind of domesticity about whatever space the girl is in as well, as if it's sort of outside of history, would be another little dimension I'd add. Like, even if the girl is in a field or in, you know, it's like, no, she makes that sort of de-historicizes whatever that moment is.
That is very true. I was thinking a lot about the Tikkun book, Notes Towards a Theory of the Young Girl. I never get the title quite right because it's quite a long and involved title. I found myself increasingly writing against it because that book, which I think was originally published in 2002 in French, but not till 2012 in English, by which time it was, the internet was kind of, the social internet was really a thing, and it was beginning to feel quite outdated. It really talks about the kind of capitalized girl image, but really from the outside, from people looking at that image and feeling oppressed or empowered by that image, but not anything about the people who inhabit or try to inhabit that persona, not anything about their labor, about the leap that they have to make in order to inhabit that persona. And of course, by the time you get this online landscape, which we've described, where anyone can jump in and identify with this persona themselves or use it as a vehicle for whatever they want to do, then, thinking about the kind of the labor involved in that, particularly when there is a large leap between their actual real lives and that fantasy, that's something I really wanted to think about.
Yeah, it's sort of like a sort of puzzling and probably bad book, that one, at the end of the day.
Yes. But interestingly bad.
I always teach it with this essay by Anne K. Clark called The Girl, A Rhetoric of Desire, which is 10 years older and does it much better.
Yeah.
Because there's a way in which sort of collapses the figure and girlhood in general into the same thing without sort of unpacking why is it that we think of the figure of the girl is uniquely corrupted by the commodity form. Like, why is it sort of projected onto that figure rather than boys or men, or whatever other humans, whatever other figure you might want, in a way that in French probably goes back to Colette, right? This sense of some unique slipperiness about girlhood and commodification. So it's a way of sort of having your misogyny and your sort of Adornian distaste for the commodity all in one bite.
Thank you, yes. So can we talk a little bit, McKenzie, you had the opportunity to read Girl Onine ahead of time.
It's so shiny.
It's shiny.
Very exciting, very shiny cover with the beautiful color choices. But I wanted to ask you about your reading experience, and you touched on it just a little bit now, but some of the parts that struck you and felt relevant to the work that you have done in your online sphere. I can see you already thumbing through pages. That's great.
I have read it, but I was just like familiarizing myself with the term that Joanna uses for them. It's thought experiments. The kind of that it's a sort of a book that's about practices, among other things, of how there's a sort of Joanna figure in the book. It's not, I don't read it as sort of like memoir. It's not about revealing the truth of the self or any of that, but there's an I, who we could call Joanna, is sort of conducting a series of experiments, online and offline, in relation to a series of encounters with the space of the internet, redactions from it back into everyday life. I love the bit about cleaning while and cleaning as a job, while sort of like lectures are being read by a robot voice in the background. One of them is mine, which I thought was hilarious. Like just imagining, like a text
lecture or something.
I
I found myself doing that. I did a PhD recently, and I found myself doing housework while while I'm listening to lectures, and also when I was just tired of kind of absorbing words through my eyes, because you just get exhaustive processing things that way. So I'd get this robotic voice, Moira. I became a good friend of Moira's, and I still use Moira a lot because I like her. She's got a kind of good voice, kind of quite serious and a bit urgent. She's an Irish bot. The other option for an Irish accent is called Microsoft Sean. Yeah, but Moira is my friend, and she reads me all sorts of stuff. And I found that, I was doing this housework, listening to this kind of theory, and quite often by theorists who wouldn't have thought of a woman doing housework, listening to their words, and would have really put these two things at opposite ends of the spectrum of ways of being. And so I would kind of liked doing this, putting these two things together and thinking about, I guess kind of habitual practices and durational practices, and also the way that thinking works in the essay form, which is kind of different.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like a book about, kind of, among other things, a book about method, of ways of how does the labor whatever we do so we can pay the rent, the labor of writing, but then also the labor of femininity and how that is expressed in both online spaces around figure of girl, and how it's expressed offline, maybe not as something else. And the sort of how the book, it's not like there's like if there's to be liberation from some of those things, it's going to have to be a little sneaky and like careful, and we're going to need lots of different methods and forms to do it. I was just thinking, I met the woman who voiced Siri.
Right.
We did an event together, and that was hilarious. And they just had her read nonsense sentences to say every single syllable, like 10 different ways, kind of thing. And then it sort of synthesized out of that. It was really kind of striking. And she can drop into Siri voice for you because she's a voice actor. And the company, it wasn't Apple who did it, and she didn't sign a non-disclosure agreement, so she's able to talk about this whole process. Every other voice since, I think they've been a little more careful around that.
Yeah, one of the things I actually really want to do is broaden the range of voices that are available on those. This is a future project. I hope I get to do it because they're so narrow. They're so focused on certain types of voices. Certainly, the UK English ones I hear, there are no regional accents. It's usually what's considered a well-educated southeastern London accent.
Received pronunciation.
What? Sorry.
Received pronunciation.
Yes, that thing. I wasn't going to say that because I didn't know that it mean anything. I guess it does. But yeah, I would love to be able to. I don't want of whatever read in that voice. These are not necessarily the voices I grew up with. I would like to see that change.
Yeah, I want a like simulated voice that's like an almost but not quite passing trans woman. That's the voice I want to hear reading like, Foucault lectures to me or whatever.
We need all the voices.
Yeah.
It's interesting, that story that you just told as well about Siri, because it loops back around to what you were mentioning earlier, Joanna, about the fragmentation of the woman and in transforming into the girl online. And I think if you happen to have an excerpt that you would like to share with us today, this would be a good time to.
Yeah, I was going to read something from the beginning of the essay called Girl Onine, but I think I'll read a bit of theory, not theory plus housework theory, because we were just talking about that. If I can find it, where did I put it? Because I've endlessly, to the misery of the publishers, reworked the order of the chapters again, that kind of thing about fragmentation. So I have to find out where I put it in the end.
While you're finding that, I'll remind our viewers at home that if you have a question for our two speakers today, you can type it as a comment right under the video, and we'll get to those towards the end of our discussion today.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to read a little bit of the theory plus housework theory experiments I did, which is actually not a particularly typical part of the book, but I just like the idea of reading it from it today. Theory plus housework theory involves doing a household care or personal upkeep task while reading, listening to, or watching works relating to theory and theorists that are freely available online, allowing the worker to think as she works. Here are some tasks I attempted, including an evaluation of their relative success or failure. On March the 11th, I painted a room with Farrow and Ball's Pavilion Grey while listening to a number of podcasts and video lectures, including Lauren Ballant's On the Inconvenience of Other People, Jack Halberstam's The Queer Art of Failure, and Donna Haraway's keynote at the 5th Annual Feminist Theory Workshop, in which she spoke about labour and play in her book, The Companion Species Manifesto. House painting is an excellent activity for theory plus housework theory, as the worker is confined to a relatively small space and is engaged in a quiet activity, enabling her to listen. If the work of theory is on video, it is even possible to keep half an eye on what is going on screen. However, this is not essential, as theory lectures are seldom physically dramatic, though some have PowerPoint presentations. House painting is in fact too successful as a theory plus housework theory activity, as the lectures and podcasts are likely to finish before the task is completed. It can be inconvenient to climb down a ladder and difficult to switch between lectures or podcasts with paint on your fingers. On 29th of August, I listened to Jonathan Ray on Wittgenstein's Nonsense while unloading the dishwasher. This is a short activity. I did not record any other activities that accompanied this lecture, but I assume I must have also tidied the kitchen, wiped the surfaces, and perhaps done some washing up. On the 30th of September, I watched a lecture by Rosie Bradotti while making chorizo and lentil stew from a recipe that had been given to me by my Argentinian friend Fernando, who put the recipe in a tweet that he later erased. All his tweets auto-erase after a month. Cooking is a sporadically successful theory plus housework theory companion activity, as it involves attention to the recipe, changes of position, including frequent turning away from the laptop to fetch ingredients, etc., plus heat and noise. It is also messy, meaning it can be difficult to change or pause podcasts without the interruption of hand washing. I have mostly utilized theory plus housework theory while undertaking substantial cooking enterprises such as making lunch for friends. On this occasion, I made the following notes transcribed from Bradotti's lecture. A, the crucial element is shared affinities. What are the ethical passions that pull us? Whose suffering, whose pain did we forget to forget? B, quotes, we are walking around inhabited by the death of others that we are trying to redeem. C, quotes, we are all in this together, but we are not one and certainly not the same, end quotes. Stew, a social model.
Thank you so much. McKenzie, did you want to share sort of some of the thoughts that you had when reading this particular essay?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about Alice. Like Alice is a figure who comes up more than once, and it sort of seems intuitively right. There's a way in which I guess everybody who reads Alice in Wonderland now would think like, oh, it's about the internet.
Well, I was thinking about that, that idea of thought experiments. I ended up thinking a lot about thought experiments that had been done mostly in the 20th century around the idea of artificial intelligence, which are usually something like thinking about whether if a number of buttons are switched on to indicate a decision, does that mean that any intelligence is involved in that process, even if no one has the full knowledge of the decision that is being taken? That's the kind of Chinese nation called the Chinese nation problem. And then other things about, Turing's experiments, thought experiments about whether you could educate a computer to take independent decisions, which he called the child machine in his 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, which is kind of one of the fundamental texts about AI. I was thinking at the same time as well about people online, about women online, and whether they could have any kind of collective intelligence, any collective solidarity, and which I think has been proved to definitely be the case through things like Me Too. But but how it operates. But Alice is also a kind of thought experiment. Carol was a logician, a mathematician, and Alice is constantly being thrown into new environments which have different rules, often absurd rules. She tries to learn the rules, she tries to get out of the environments, but she never quite learns the rules satisfactorily. She's never able to operate fully within them. She's just transferred immediately to another environment, which is equally ridiculous. The kind of idea that she's a young girl is a thing. She's those iconic kind of illustrations by Tenniel seem somehow very important in the persona kind of is attached to ideas of innocence, I guess, and the idea of learning, but not necessarily learning for a purpose, like maybe a boy of that era would be learning with an end in sight of some sort of profession. So, you know, Alice never really learns, and you know, a lot of people who go online are dropped into these various environments where the rules change very suddenly and have an equally difficult time learning. But another thing I've seen of Alice online is I've seen a lot of kind of sexualized Alices, which is really interesting. I particularly wrote about one photo I saw of Paris Hilton in an Alice Halloween costume, which was a sort of Alice costume made sort of suddenly shrunken, so it had cleavage and it was a very short skirt, and the apron had become, you know, the kind of like smock that a Victorian child would wear had become a sort of an apron, like a kind of serving apron, you know, like a waiter's apron, and she was holding a tray of drinks, and they seemed to kind of focus all these ideas about sort of femininity, innocence, serving, sexuality, objectification. It just seemed somehow to be emblematic of this kind of girl position, which is sort of hooked to all these concepts.
Yeah, and you know, there's maybe like multiple distributed versions of Girl, of kind of, because I'm thinking those ones are so connected also to whiteness in sort of also particularly kind of creepy ways. But there's some that are not, kind of thing. And the Alice figure is maybe connected to the Lolita figure, which is, you know, in Japanese culture has a whole other set of resonances and so on. But I'm interested in whether to what extent is our girl avatars things that are available for however you want to define women to play with and interact with on the down low. Is there a way that a kind of transversal girlhood can kind of operate in the internet?
You mean that it can it operate in radical ways, in revolutionary ways, or is it
even just interesting ways, like to set the bar low?
No, I mean, you know, the whole, one of the things I wanted to write about are the ways out that sort of image, that kind of persona offers for people who are very much considered women offline, who are considered not a sort of young person with a potential that is involved in beauty. I think it was really interesting when you said that the girl is dehistoricized, because I've really recently been writing about that and the angle through which she's just dehistoricized as beauty. It is her, if you look at, you know, adverts, just like billboards, there, or, you know, magazine shoots are particularly guilty of this, I think. Often, you know, you see a very beautiful young woman in a environment which she's contrasted with, and this is often kind of quite offensively done, and she stands out from it. She's part of it but not part of it, and so this kind of removal from context is very much a thing. But it can be a thing that can be quite liberating if your feminized position offline is very much one of the kind of domestic servant, which either might be formalized or unformalized. The potential of the ability to inhabit potential, even if it's non-directed potential, or even if it's potential that seems like it might be directed towards a point of sale or a point of exploitation, just to step into that role that has potential, is a very interesting thing to do. And it's certainly something that I've done when I sort of started doing public things online, not private things online. In the 2000s, I started a blog because I was, you know, at the time I was working as an illustrator. I started doing drawings myself. There's just drawings of, and putting them online. They were narrative drawings. They were things that I saw going on, and I usually featured in them, but only as a kind of a marginal figure. But certainly as a kind of figure, rather like some of the girl figures I talk about in the book, like a kind of Carrie Bradshaw, who isn't necessarily the center of the action, but who kind of wonders about things in a I don't know how to describe it, in a sort of a slightly whimsical way. And I was interested in taking that position, which I hadn't really which is often seen as a kind of trivial position, a trivial way of thinking, as a serious, I guess, philosophical position, as a halting point, a pausing point in which to consider, to keep things running, not to bring things to too swift a close morally, or to keep open a field of discussion.
Yeah, the goals associated with the trivial and the non-serious, and the decontextualized, and there's a whole bunch of stuff where the thing that always struck me as paradoxical about this is sort of both, the great avatars of patriarchal discourse and second wave feminism seem to agree about all of that. And it always struck me as a weird alliance, like with the girl at the fulcrum of it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that. Yeah, yes. Well, certainly she's kind of at the intersection of many forces, and I just am interested in whether I think she's a figure which can be inhabited, because of that kind of marginalization of the girl, can be inhabited by a range of people who are just looking for a little way in, and whether that can be then used in a different, in a way, in a non-exploitative way, but in a way that doesn't alter or dismiss the power that she has, is something that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, that's sort of a recurring thing, is that in the text as well, the maybe indirect, obtuse power of a figure that's sort of also defined by powerlessness, by a sort of non-agency, seems to have an agency, and that seems kind of interesting and paradoxical.
Well, it's also just it's a contingent position. It's a position that if you can't inhabit any of the positions of power, it's a position that's to get in under that cloak of apparent powerlessness, or non-directed powerlessness, power without control, is it's an interesting enough place to be if you're coming from a place of even less power, I think.
Right. Yeah, and it's like the other version, or another figure of the girl is the sex worker. Like it's inhabiting, because one thing about girl is the girl is prior to the space of being reproductive.
Yes.
But the sex worker is outside of it altogether, or supposed to be. So and there's all of this sort of fear and tension around the alleged powers of the girl, and which then of course attracts violence.
Yep.
And Girl Onine may attract physical violence, but also kind of indirect forms of violation maybe as well. So I'm interested in sort of the fugitiveness of the figure, and having to sort of navigate that as a kind of online avatar.
Yes, it was interesting. Amalia Ullman's 2014 project, in which the Argentinian artist who took on a girl persona online. I did write some of this, but it didn't go into some things about this, but it didn't go into the book in the end. And I think the most interesting thing about her project, where she went through various kind of stages of Instagram girl avatars, kind of really sexy, like someone who sort of just goes shopping, and then a kind of vulnerable kind of girl having a nervous breakdown, and then a sort of lifestyle goddess who's into yoga, and these three kind of this triptych was enacted over a number of months, apparently as her real life, although it really wasn't. But the most interesting thing, the kind of point at which the art happened in that for me, is really in the reactions that she got, which many of which were, as you said, violent, or envious, or super interesting. The book that she put together based on the project has all the notes from the kind of the comments, the Instagram comments, in the back. You can just look it up and look up each photograph, what reaction she got to it. And I think that's what was really happening in this piece. It was exposing something, some emotions and thoughts that cluster around these personas.
Yeah, and there are a lot of them. Yeah, and like Ballant makes an appearance in the book, like the effective power of the girl who seemingly has nothing and is nothing, and yet attracts desire, envy, hatred, aggression, is maybe castrating if you're Freudian. I don't know how useful language that is. So the power of powerlessness strikes me as sort of interestingly paradoxical in that sense.
And that's why it's difficult to kind of, although it can be a very useful position, it's very difficult to say, okay, what do we do with this without rejecting it? Because I don't think that's useful. Rejecting the kind of forms that we've been allowed to inhabit and have inhabited creatively is not very useful, I think. So at the end, I had great difficulty writing the end of this book because I thought, okay, what do we do next? Because obviously, as the girl is so easily torn towards capitalism, towards exploitation, and isn't able to kind of hold that position open, isn't able to kind of move. But so I was trying at the end to sort of just write something that was an anti-manifesto, really, because again, I didn't want to get into that kind of manifesto rhetoric where everything's definite and where we know exactly what to do, or where I know what to do and I'm going to tell you because I don't know what to do. So okay, that's a spoiler for the book. Sorry, I don't know what to do. I'm not going to tell you what to kind of how to proceed, how to act. But I was interested in this idea of the post girl, both as a post, as something that comes afterwards, but also something that's the conveyor of a message. Because I think this also came from an autocorrect that whenever I wrote posthuman, my autocorrect corrected it to postman. Okay,
I love the serendipity of that. Picking on my idea.
For you, but that would be interesting as well. Yeah. But no, it autocorrected to postman. So I thought, what is the post girl is some sort of figure that could be gone towards as something that didn't reject any of these girl techniques, but didn't fall into their potholes, the pitfalls, whatever you call them, either, if that's even possible. And I don't know whether it is. So at the end, I was talking about ways that the persona could be run in parallel with the necessities of work, domestic labor, paid labor, neither persona kind of taking precedence or dominating the other, each being personas that were able to inhabit in some ways, as Denise Riley says, ironically. If that is, I think if we're talking about kind of going from something rather than going towards something, if that's any kind of platform, as internet platforms are considered platforms.
Yeah, like most trans women didn't get to have girlhoods.
Yep.
And the downside of that's never stressed. We're always told we're socialized male, and it's like, but we wanted this other thing and we were denied it, and now legislatively denied it in a substantial part of the United States, so that can't happen. So hence it becomes a supercharged, bittersweet kind of figure in that regard. Mm-hmm. And then the other connection to make to that is there's a way in which the trans woman is always only girl because assumed to be non-reproductive. Mm-hmm. Not always technically true, obviously, but sort of assumed, and in some cases forcibly sterilized as the condition for getting your documents changed and access to care in some parts of the world. So this is kind of exclusion from womanhood that goes along with an exclusion from the girlhood in the first place. So you're kind of like doubly excluded from either figure. So yeah, like it was an intense read for me to see it through that, and to then think about the power of the figure of the girl as an online figure in trans women's lives, because like a lot of us came through that in some way, in some unconscious way. Yeah. But the other thing I wanted to pick up is the book's, like, among other things, a bit of a primer in media and communication theory. Like, I want to sell this as a good thing. It's a reason you should get this book, because it sort of explain some things about Turing and others. And what's the connection for you? And there is a connection, if I can just foreshadow, in Turing gets the Turing test from a test of gender, as there was a pathway.
Oh, yeah.
but you hit on some others, and I'd love to hear you tease that out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I've started using AI in my work. I've recently done a few AI projects. There's one that I did for this Markovich Award, which was a Republic of Ireland award for a text-based project. I think I'm the only person to, I think everyone else so far has done books. It is a book. But I also wanted to co-write with an AI, and I also wanted to investigate gender and language. So I looked at Irish women's historical voices that have been recorded, of course, much fewer than men. And I designed an AI that I taught, I was learning a bit of coding and managed to teach myself enough to be able to create an AI that would train exclusively on these voices. Of course, a lot of the problems with commercially available AI is that they just scrape the internet, and of course that's why things like the Tay bot in 2016 on Twitter just went down very quickly, because it started parroting offensive views sort of super quickly. No surprise. So if you want to kind of make a proper investigation of language, then you have to be very careful about the kind of AI you're making, and where it's getting its information from, including information on things like sentence structure. And so I designed an AI that predicted character by character, rather than kind of like looking at sentence structures that could have come from outside the work. So sometimes it makes up funny words, but I sort of messed around with it until it made something that I was
how Joycean.
Yes, it was rather. I used some really nice historical document. One of them collected by an activist who's 90 and has been working in Dublin and around for all her life. And in 1988, on the centennial kind of celebration of Dublin, of course, no women were being celebrated, and Attic Press, a small feminist press from Galway, decided to commission Maureen Johnston to interview women from Dublin of all generations, of different ethnicities, different classes, and just get their opinion on their lives as women in Dublin, and the future of the place, their memories, their associations. So that was one of I was able to go and meet Maureen and ask her if I could use this text as one of my texts, and she said yes, but only because she said, I don't understand the internet, I'm 90. And I showed her some of the output of some of the texts I put in so far, and she said, oh, it's like Molly Bloom's monologue.
Right.
So she was really happy for me to use it. She was happy that this was what was going to happen. Yeah, but so I've obviously started working with AI. You start getting very interested in these issues. Where are these data sets from? How are they speaking to us? And what is it possible to say with them, given that they are always going to be constrained by and very much politically constrained by the sources that they draw their words from. So of course you go back and look at sort of some of the original work on AI, and also some stuff like J.L. Austin and writing on speech acts. That's very interesting, on the effect of so there's a big mashup of all sorts of things there. I think I probably came to J.L. Austin partly from going via Judith Butler's work on Austin, and then it just kind of goes in all directions, really. So I'm bringing a lot of theory from lots of different areas together, and including kind of stuff about learning code, about the way code works in hierarchical and inevitably binary ways, and how that works as a kind of structure of thought.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking, Joyce got some components of the work he's famous for from his daughter, right? Like the girl is present in the text, and comes out in various ways. Maybe having AI produce Molly Bloom's speech rather than somebody like Joyce is kind of a way to take the language about women and girls away from men. And but the machine has its own problems, I guess, in terms of the way certain kind of structures for the production of language are kind of built into it.
Yeah, well, it's the kind of Haraway alliance between the female and the cyborg. So that's always an interesting thing to go back to. But yeah, you know, it's nice to think about bypassing the author figure in many ways altogether. And that, I think, also for the AI project, that's why I didn't want to use fiction. I wanted to use, obviously every form of speaking comes with its own expected forms and its own kind of internalized difficulties. But yeah, I wanted to use the voices of women who didn't think that they were speaking creatively, and make something creative from that.
Yeah, that question of author reminds me of another figure who comes up at least once in the book, which is Kathy Acker, who in some ways was trying to non-creatively arrange texts of all kinds. And there's I don't know, do you see this book as a little bit connected to those experiments?
Definitely, yeah. No, what I like particularly, it makes me think of kind of Acker's relationship between the personal and the impersonal in her work, which is very exciting for me. I like the way that she takes the personal and makes it something that makes it impersonal because it's made from borrowed language. I think she talked about going into a library, I can't remember which library, and getting out all the stories of murderers, and then just replacing all the pronouns with I. And sort of just trying on these figures for size, and kind of lending herself also outwards to these kind of narratives, which were you know, I presume were narratives that had certain internal forms. I don't know whether they were kind of fiction or newspaper reports, but whatever they were, they would have had certain kind of forms for dealing with these stories.
Yeah, that's sort of early work as the Black Tarantula.
Yeah.
And I forget what journal she sent them to, and she was staying with Eleanor Anton at the time, and the editor was a friend of Eleanor's, and was writing to Eleanor like, "This person is crazy, get this person out of your house, they should not be minding your kid," like assuming that these texts were somehow, if it's I, then it's autobiographical and confessional and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to press on that a little more, that the way that the I works in this text, like there's and it does deliver those pleasures for the reader of the little anecdotal things about everyday life that we can assume are Joanna Walsh or not. It sort of doesn't matter, but it's there's a way in which you're trying not to write the I as conventionally understood in memoir. Yeah.
No, definitely not. I mean, I teach autofiction, and I as a kind of creative writing technique, but I'm always thinking about how the I is borrowed, constructed, is not personal, and how language is inevitably never going to do that for you, and how it can do many things that you couldn't do without it. So, you know, definitely, I think particularly of kind of, I don't know, interpersonal identity, identification, fantasy, and as he said, desire. Yeah, I like to think about these other methods of thinking the self, other than, you know, the methods we've been given to think the self are they're literary techniques. So, you know, they're not necessarily there are some things, you know, if we have any selves, then we can't fully know what they are with language, but we can know a lot of other things.
It's curious to me that like autofiction is usually treated as a term of an object of derision in circles now, but that's where all the women and the queers and the trans people are, and the non-white people, like, are all writing that stuff. Like, did you think through why you're opposed to it? You know, it strikes me as a little slippery.
Yeah. I mean, no, I'm happy to reclaim the idea of autofiction, or never having left it as a positive thing. And, you know, to be honest, you know, a lot of the time, at a teaching level, people haven't, when I'm teaching creative writing, people haven't even thought about it yet, because they're thinking still about, you know, forms that are better known. So often they're quite open to it, having not thought about that. So yeah, you know, I'm pre the backlash against it, really. And actually I don't know, I suppose I quite like the backlash, or I don't like it, but I like to kind of write against. I like to valorize things that are, it's just a habit, you know. It's a habit having come from a situation in which I find that I suppose that things that I do have not been valorized, and I want to kind of like, I want to think about how these things can draw out their values, and think about whether they are actually, and that they are actually important. Yeah.
Yeah, just a reminder, if people want to put comments or questions in the chat, we can read them out, and I can ask, or Shady can ask Joanna for you. Yeah, I'm also like drawn to like fallen or tainted forms like that.
Yeah. And also the fragmentation, which, you know, seemed nothing, which is so prevalent in autofictional forms, but it seemed nothing more to me than a kind of a naturally slightly accurate version of life. It didn't seem to be a kind of, you know, it's all the things that autofiction is accused of.
Yeah, it just seems like it's a useful space for
yeah.
And also for teaching. Yeah, it's a great way to get people out of certain assumptions. You know, I find students have these sort of 19th century romantic assumptions about writing that it's a little helpful to sort of move on from that a little bit.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, with just a few minutes left, we don't have any questions in the chat just yet. But I wanted to ask you, Joanna, to expand a little bit on the different forms that might appear in Girl Onine, a user manual, because you mentioned that the essays are a bit different from each other, from essay to essay.
Yeah.
And I wonder how those differences reflect, you know, the transformations that you have undergone over the time that it took you to write the book, and also if they were, how do I phrase this, if they were impacted at any by sort of global matters and attitudes as they've been unfolding over the past few years as well.
Well, the first part of the book I found very, very difficult to write, because I'm trying to kind of describe pre-internet experiences or non-internet experiences, and indeed non-linguistic experiences, which are, you know, opposed to this kind of online fluency. So I found it, and I think, you know, it's a shame almost that bit's up front, because it's a harder bit to read, and, you know, I wish I could have made it easier for the reader, but it's just not easy. Like, nothing about that position is easy. Nothing about being indescribable, being undescribed, being underwritten rather than overwritten. You know, even if, you know, the girl is often overwritten as some kind of negative space, which, you know, which is an equally difficult position. But I found it really, really difficult to write. In that there are mostly the thought experiments. So that's where there are different approaches. So there's thought experiments. The thought experiments are often kind of the things about coding structures. They are first person, but they become quite formal. Then there are sort of, and also the non-plottiness of that kind of experience is quite difficult to push forward as well. And I did want to kind of write that section in which there is a change and things do happen, but they happen very subtly. And they kind of approach this sudden and very first and very different kind of existence, which is an online existence, and in which suddenly everything's very fluid. And I found it easy to write and also fun to write. But, you know, equally, as I said, it's not, there is no kind of, one is not the answer to the other. They're just both contingent positions from which I and many other people have found that they have to operate from some version of. So yeah, you know, and world events, I don't know, you know, just the internet going on. And yeah, I mean, I feel like in some ways it's a historical account of the internet, because everything keeps changing so quickly. And I think so much for the better in terms of the ability for people to speak from a wider range of positions. There is quite a lot about blogging, 10, 15 years ago, in which it was much easier to inhabit some of these kind of girl positions, which were relatively conservative, because the whole kind of push forward of the personal essay, of the first personal industrial complex, however exploitative it was, it undid a lot of feminine stereotypes, and undid a lot of stereotypes about who could write and who should get paid for writing and the forms that they could write in. I think that's the kind of personal essay boom, if anything, is coming from there, and it's coming from the readers as well as the writers. There was a hunger for experiences being related, a wider range of experiences, and this is where this is where this kind of, again, very trivialized form of personal essay, which was largely derided, has done something extraordinary.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you both for this incredible conversation. I found it very illuminating, and I'm very pleased to have the two of you in conversation with each other, because I think your work has so much in common, as well as you're speaking the same language, if that makes sense.
Well, that's because I read Joanna's books.
I was just reading the beginning of Philosophy for Spiders, and I was very interested in the kind of whole, I've only got like into the first chapter, but the idea of kind of erotics as a form of conversation, as a form of theory making, as well, which is, all this kind of, it's just something I'm very interested in.
What can I say? We read each other's books.
That's the best way to do it. And thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you to our viewers for watching tonight. For those of you who still would like to grab a copy of Girl Onine, a user manual, you can join us at Lost City Books on 18th Street in Adams Morgan, DC, or you can hop right onto our website, lostcitybookstore.com, and grab your copy there. To conclude, where can our viewers keep up with you if they want to follow you on social media or check out the websites?
Twitter, really. I'm trying to redo my website at the moment because it's really out of date. But yeah, I'm mostly on Twitter because I'm a word person. I tried to do Instagram and I'm not very good at it. Inevitably, for all its failings, that's what I like to do.
I put our handles. I'm just check if I got yours right, Joanna. I put our Twitter handles in the chat.
Yep, that's me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shady. It was a pleasure. And Lost City Books.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You both have a good evening. And Joanna, I know it's very late for you, so please enjoy a nice rest as well.
See you all on the internet.